Okay, we're all good here. We're recording. Hey guys, listening at home, so to speak, or later, or while you're exercising on an MP3, hit the button I did. All right. All right. There are a few different ideas that they're somewhat related in the general topic of things, the general idea of what we talk about, but they're also a little bit disparate. So I thought I would at least put them on the screen and we can figure out what the takeaways are. I have a screen that says I have a slide that says takeaway on it, so we'll take a look. That involves the first thing about when to use quote unquote force and how to stop overusing it. I thought I would touch on a little bit further about competition and point something out there. And I want to keep on building. I've been thinking a lot over the last week and a half and for years, but also for the last week and a half specifically about context, and that the concept is so central to rigging the game. It's so central to success, happiness, and so forth, right? As a matter of fact, what I talk about with you guys in this type of law of implication webinars and training is it's about context, right? It's about greater context, and I have a number of thoughts about that. It's I can't really overhype or overstate the importance of the idea of it's not just paying attention to context, but because one of the central concepts of my training is that you're not your mind at all, then we sorry, a little bit short on sleep as well today. I wanted to show up for sure, and I have plenty of good stuff to say. But again, it might be a little less combobulated, a little more discombobulated than usual. But maybe not. You never know how these things turn out. It's always an adventure. But as I'm able to convey this better, so I've been thinking about there's so many ways in which we want to feel like the context is taken care of, right? So, for example, we want to feel like we're already fairly good and smart, right? We don't want to find out that we've been screwing everything up, right? And that's an example of we want to believe that the context is okay. Like we don't want bad news, or we even have a concept of bad news. What's bad news in the general meaning of the term is news, is feedback that the context of the world, of our lives, of a project that we're working on is not as good as we thought, right? That would be bad news, right? And good news would be hearing that the context of things is better than we thought previously. So there can only be such a thing as good and bad news then if we want the context to be in our favor, of course. But there's a way that we want it to already be in our favor. And then if we follow that through, that means we constantly have this goal or cognitive bias, right, for something that already exists, for something that's outside of our control, right? Because as we understand what we mean by context, it's what we're not currently aware of, right, or paying attention to, right? I don't know what the best word is for the opposite of context. I don't know, maybe content would be one shot at that, but there's like what the horse sees with blinders on, right? And then there's the greater context. Why do you put blinders on a horse if with a horse and buggy or something? It's to keep them from freaking out about the greater context to it. The idea would be that it's only going to be a negative, at least for the riders, right, and so forth, if the horse doesn't have blinders. So there's a benefit, and then we all know, and it's correct, that there's some sort of benefit to focus, there's some sort of benefit to flow. And in both of those cases, there's a benefit where we're able to let go and ignore context. On the other hand, it's also pretty logically obvious that just ignoring context is not helpful, right? That and rigging the game, the point is to rig the greater context in your favor, so that It's not just about like blazing forward and hoping for the best, right? And especially if you are trying to move forward or progress and it's not happening in a very smooth flowing way, then we need a way to transition in a calm, confident way to attending to context, right? We could say, you might say, do I mean the big picture? Yes, with a qualification, often people will look at the big picture, but they're not looking foundationally. They're not looking all the way, right? And what my philosophy is about, my training, et cetera, and my strategy overall that's very effective is to take it all the way when it comes to context, which you can't do every minute, right? I get immersed in things too, right? You can set things up so that you can obviously just do a task and not worry about the meaning of life at every moment and so forth, right? Or that you're not your mind or all kinds of questions, right? Like this stuff. We're not only focused on the greater context or the foundational greatest context and so forth, but we do want to be able to take it into account and get it straight. And those of you who know me or have learned from me for longer know that ultimately I think it's critical, and that we're not really exercising our free will, which means we're not really coming close to maximizing goodness in our lives if we don't get all the way to the bottom of things when it comes to context, get that right, and then kind of rebuild from there. That's critical, and that's something that is typically ignored and wished away, which then is another example of that question of context. Why is it ignored? Why is the greatest context ignored? Some of the, I have a little slide up here. Examples of greater context, like a good question is, and it's been asked. I remember Megan asking it, and certainly it's a good, normal, fairly solid question as well. What do I mean by context? What do I mean by greater context, and so forth? Could I explain more? Can I give more examples? Well, here's a few examples of things that are generally in the context that you can get right together with me or on your own, but it's going to be more effective and efficient with me, right? Most realistically, where we can rig the game in your favor in a way that people are normally ignoring, and these are going to stack for you, where you're going to have such an advantage that that only in the short term, when people start way ahead of you with a particular topic or task or whatever, are they going to have better results. Otherwise, and then forgetting about competition in general, you're just going to have such a stronger, more powerful ability to win. And by win, I don't mean beating other people. There's another little new quick distinction I have for you. But basically, winning, when I say winning, I mean solving the problem, right? Whatever it is. Getting the result that you want or solving the problem. And then winning overall means there aren't problems. There might still be opportunities and more good to be created. But when I say I'm here to win overall, I want all problems gone. And the way to do that is to keep understanding the greater context, seeking understanding until I'm able to dissolve them for myself and other people. And that's going to come from places like here, like on this slide. One awesomely helpful thing to understand, it's something I've called the master key in the past, is realizing that our goals that we are generally more aware of have a kind of super magnet on them for us as individuals, which is what we feel like should be the case, like should be normal in terms of, for example, how much money you make or how much you should work in a day, just how you should respond to people, how relationships should be in various ways and so forth. But all of your kind of goal, like more surface goals, more obvious goals that you could name if you were to write them on paper, they are they're kind of coming from these kind of invisible super goals that you're going to have in your mind, which are like what you feel like is normal and the standards that got put. But that's going to come until and unless you re-rig it majorly. That's going to come from your environment, right? And it's going to be a lot of it's going to get started when you were very little, and then it comes from all over. But you can use common sense to figure out what's going to be affecting your norms and standards. In OMG, we there's a lot of context built in, right? That is going to powerfully affect your norms and standards in a direction that you're going to want, right? That's going to be helpful for you in terms of money getting and even in terms of greater stuff, right? Greater context, at least, like mindset with Cotton, or what I talk about, which is actually even more contextual than mindset, in essence, is what we'll talk about together. For shorthand, we call it mindset when we're just talking briefly in like a marketing webinar, but what I talk about really is different than mindset, or kind of greater context than that. Realizing this about norms and standards is really big, because you can intellectually affirm, or you can write down on paper that you want to hit a certain goal, but you're going to be in a tug of war with your own mind until and unless the norm, what your mind feels like you should achieve and what's normal for you, and what it'll do for money is your mind will, without you really realizing it, will go out and decide like what your peer group is, right, and stuff like that, and it'll also have a sense of whether you're supposed to do better than your peer group or a little worse, but kind of keep up with it, at least if you're within, a decent range of the average, above or below, that sort of thing. And again, that's going to kind of invisibly tug on things. Could be the same thing with health or weight, or again, just like whether marriages should stay together or not, right, is going to be strongly influenced by norms and standards that you yourself have, which could be different from person to person. Of course, people whose parents stay together, right? What is it? And then obviously, what's science going to prove if we do a survey, right? It's going to show that the children that have parents that stay together are more likely to stay together when they get married. And is that because they're better people or not? Well, what it is because it just feels more normal to them to stay together, and it feels more normal for children whose parents got divorced to split up. Is that an absolute? No, there's other factors, but it's a strong pull, and so it's going to affect the numbers, and it does, right? And that's going on all over the place. So realizing instead of if you're struggling with the particular goals where you feel like the issue is motivation or whatever it might be, then what you can do is operate on the greater context, and that is to do things that adjust what you feel like is normal, right? Joining OMG was one of those things, right? Associating. This is why people will say the power of association. But there's all sorts of observations and discoveries that are subsets of things I'll talk about, but where you'll understand why they work, right? So the reason association, who you associate with, is powerful is to the extent to which it affects the norms and standards that your brain goes and gets. So when you recognize this, then you can do things intentionally that operate on these things, on the norms and standards of your own mind, and you can understand, not only do things that operate on your own mind's norms and standards, but you can understand kind of how it works in general, like kind of notice how it's working and become more aware of it and just understand it, right? Including what we're talking about now, and I'll visit this concept pretty consistently. It'll just come up because it'll be related to most everything I talk about here relates to itself. So it's a lot of what I talk about is holographic, right? It's all based around the question of looking in the context of success and happiness, right? And again, which is another, we keep coming back holographically, and I'll explain what I mean by hologram in a second, for those of you who don't know. But once again, why is it that people feel like to have success or happiness, they just need the blueprint? They just need the plug-in, so to speak, right? They don't need to redesign their website, speaking metaphorically. They just want the trick, or the even people's meaning of strategy. I realize there's two different usages of the word strategy that people can get confused what I mean by strategy. When people talk about, like, in the phrase of like eliciting someone's strategy, or you used a good strategy, then that's not the meaning that I'm generally using when I'm talking about meta strategy or something. So strategy in the way of like eliciting strategy, or is like a step-by-step plan, basically. And it's a good strategy in that usage of the term if the plan ends up working, right? When I talk about strategy, I'm talking about what? Like generally, I've said before that it has to do with alternative use of limited resources, right? If you have unlimited resources, if you're basically all-powerful within a particular situation, then you don't need strategy, right? You just go and accomplish what you're doing by spending as much as you need to until you get the result, right? Even if I use the example of walking into a restaurant, then if you have plenty of money to buy what you want on the menu, then you don't need strategy because you're not really making alternative decisions based on limited resources. You're able to afford whatever's in the menu. I'm stipulating that. I'm just saying I'm creating a story or situation where scenario where you can. So if that's the case, then there's no strategy. You don't have limited resources relative to that situation of ordering whatever you want. However, in many cases in life, you have limited time within a certain at least time frame. You have limited amount of favors you can ask or trades that you can make, to gather people to do stuff. You have limited money, maybe limited creativity in a particular day. Right? You can't figure out a whole bunch of difficult questions or write a whole bunch of different sales letters in a particular day, that kind of thing. Once we understand strategy to be about the alternative use of limited resources, then we come back right again to context. How can you use the better strategy? Again, if we remember that I don't mean just having the right plan, right? Calling a strategy just step by step. If you already know in advance all the steps to achieve your goal, then great, right? You're basically omnipotent and all-knowing regarding that particular task or that situation, and you just go do it. You don't need strategy. You don't need me. You don't need anything. You just already have it all figured out. So anyone that says, "Oh, just make a step-by-step plan and accomplish it," anytime that works, great. You don't need any advice in the first place. You just go accomplish it, right? When you drive certain places, when you accomplish tasks that are routine for you, you don't need any success thinking, right? You just go do it. But then there's all the stuff that we want that we're not kind of all-knowing, we can't for sure get it, right? And that's when we're dealing with strategy. And then ignoring context is we just want the plan. We want someone else to tell us the step-by-step. We want to pull in a template. And we might get lucky and that might work. But if we want to ensure our success, then you ensure success how? You ensure success contextually. You can't assure success if you don't understand the greater context. You can hope, right? And you can, if you follow instructions of someone that pretty much does something duplicatable, then again, if that works, great. You don't need anyone's help. But if you get the instructions and you're not getting the result one way or the other, including if you seem to have a motivation problem or a time problem or whatever, then you need to go into the context and figure out the bottlenecks that are stopping you. And you need to, it's going to involve alternative use of limited resources. So strategy, in the sense of being a good strategist, a person who's a master strategist is someone who understands how to go about figuring out in a new situation or in a not yet understood situation with a problem that hasn't been solved yet. Right? When we talk about problem solving or getting a result, we're talking about things that aren't super easy. Right? If they're super easy, we don't need to discuss anything. So the bottleneck in our lives is obviously problems that we're trying to solve that we haven't solved yet. Right? If that's the case, to be a master strategist, we need to go about, we don't already have the answer, right? So the idea of just hearing the answer, finding it, and applying it, again, we can, by the two very different meanings of strategy, we can say, oh, this person's a master strategist just because they made a step-by-step plan that worked for them. But you can't, there's most of what you're going to actually encounter in life, in real life, you're not just going to have an exact recipe that you can hear from somebody and make it happen. in OMG, there's plenty of recipes you can get that will solve particular situations for you, right? Obviously regarding search engine optimization and so forth. To the extent that works, excellent, right? But unless everyone's making $1 million a month or whatever they want to make, right, 6 figures a month or even 5 figures a month, then that's proof that the recipes by themselves, which are all correct and effective within OMG, is not quite yet enough, right? And so the answers then at that point, or at this point where you might be right now, to get to a number that you want to get to, is going to be in the greater context. And that's where meta strategy, being a master strategist, comes into play. And again, that all comes down to how to be better at making better alternative use decisions of limited resources. How do you spend your money? How do you spend your time? And how do you go about answering that? Right? How do you figure out how to spend your time in order to get to 6 figures a month? Well, the only thing you're going to be able that's going to work, it's going to have to do with understanding context better, right? You can't figure out how to spend your time unless you understand the greater context of the different alternatives that you could do, right? So meta strategy then is about you can approach any goal, any situation, any problem in a calm, confident way, because you're understanding. You can almost picture like physically or visually, you kind of surround the whole problem or the whole result with this idea of, okay, I just need to understand the situation well enough that I make better and better alternative decisions with my time, with my money, with my hands, what I type, right, and so forth. And so I just keep understanding, right, which is, of course, something I've said in many different ways and I'm always getting back to. And relates to the third thing I wrote here, how do you measure progress, understanding versus results. A master strategist does not just hope that or want to convince themselves or have cognitive bias that they already understand the situation well enough and then just go out and try to get results. And then if the results are what they hope for, then get even more overconfident until arrogance kicks in, right? You can go out and see what results you get, but do that in order to serve your understanding. Don't do it in order to just convince yourself that you don't need understanding, right? Think of the difference there, right? People will go out and get results hoping that they won't have to inconvenience themselves by understanding the greater context better, right? And just get arrogant, be like, oh yeah, I got this, great. Now, if you're getting a result consistently, let's suppose you're ranking websites consistently, then what you can conclude is that that's probably not your bottleneck. And so importance, right? Part of understanding context is dealing with the issue of importance. And then what's important is what's bottlenecking you. So you can go out and get a sense of, is that going to be a bottleneck? And if your best guess is it's not, then you go look somewhere else in terms of increasing your money, right? In this case, probably either getting clients, right, or otherwise monetizing your ability to rank websites. Another example of what I mean by greater context, and this is for everyone, every person on the planet should be spending some of their time, they should be strategists and realize that they need to, what's the best alternative use of their time, their creativity, and so forth. And they should be allocating significantly more of their time and creativity to understanding their identity, who are they, and how does that relate to mind, right? How does that relate to consciousness and power, right? Free will, that sort of thing. What is it? Who are we? What do we do? How does that relate to our mind? How do we work with our mind? And so forth. So that question matters for everyone, no matter what you think your goals are, right? You either don't have your goals right in the first place unless you want everyone to be basically happy, right? Net happiness, max net happiness, not have problems, not have bad, right? There might be ever increasing good at that point, but they don't have bad. So either that's you understand that's your overall ideal, or you further lack understanding, and your greater context for all the rest of your goals is off. And what happens when we're ignoring greater context? And to make a more tangible example of ignoring greater context, what if there's a bunch of niggling tasks that you're ignoring, or things that feel like they're fraying around the edges in your life, or with relationships, or with paperwork, or whatever it might be, or maybe you're getting clients, but you're not learning enough how to fulfill right on them. Or your systems, maybe you can do SEO well, but your systems for communicating with your clients is not very good, and so that's kind of fraying. If that greater context is being ignored, how do you feel? The problem is when you start to when something relating to the problems in that context start to come near the edge of your awareness, you start to feel upset, right? And more powerless. And so when there's problems in the greater context, you start to not feel good, and you start to be inefficient as you get even getting close, as you approach thinking about those things or dealing with those things, and that's going to have ripple effects that aren't going to be very helpful. And everyone's pretty much in this boat when it comes to identity and mind. Every person on the planet doesn't understand who they are and how their mind relates to them properly. And so that comes up a lot, but people just kind of panic and feel bad and ignore it without even realizing it. So it's constantly an issue. Your mind is constantly matters. It's constantly a part of things. And who you are is constantly a part of things. And people screw that up nonstop. And so there's this error in their greater context, but that's constantly practically relevant for themselves, and it also makes it very hard to relate to other people and so forth, because you don't figure out who you are and how you relate to your mind, and then if you have that wrong, then that gets transferred out to other people as well. You get it wrong about their mind and who they are and how that all works, or vice versa. You get it more and more straight, as a lot of you have been doing, right, in alchemy and other stuff, and then you relate to other people significantly better. So that's just another example of the greater context, of examples of what might be context for an average person, and the kind of thing that might be ignored. Here's another one, is spending and reasons for spending, just in terms of money, right? So someone might have income goals, but it might kind of get vague from there. Like someone might say, oh, I want to make $10,000 a month, right? I use that as an example. Or more, or 20,000, or 50,000, or 100,000. But then that goal itself is kind of swimming in limbo. It's kind of sitting nowhere. Like there's not much clarity regarding what happens then, or even why that number. And when the context is vague like that, when the goal ends up being arbitrary means there's like a justification or a reason, but there's not a reason for the reason. Or there's a reason for the reason, there's a reason for the reason, but then there's no reason there, right? At some point, you kind of hit an abyss. And so, one piece of context that might matter is people might have these goals regarding money and then not think about spending. They also might not think about their norms and standards, right? And be struggling against those. But then, for a lot of people, their spending puts them on a clock, stresses them out, creates a whole context there. And what did I say? When there's problems in your context, when it starts to come up, what do? You feel kind of panicked, upset. You feel a sense of avoidance. You feel a sense of helplessness, which then erodes your confidence with things you normally would even be confident about, and so on and so forth. So without having a sense of spending and clarity there and having proper boundaries you can't just I've said this before many times, you can't just make up boundaries. You need to discover how they are naturally. To give kind of an illustration of that, for anyone that has kids or just even imagining how with kids, kids will reasonably sense when you have a discovered boundary that has to be the case, right? They can't just run out in the middle of the street. They can't touch an oven. You will communicate differently regarding a boundary like that is like a revealed boundary. It has a reality to it. versus one that you just kind of come up with that you decide that you're just going to enforce, but it doesn't really have an underlying reality to it. Your communication will be different. Same thing with spending. It probably applies to weight loss and stuff too. When you have boundaries, you want to relate them, or when you have spending, you want to relate it to reality and find out, well, what do I really need to spend? And then that'll also translate to how much you need to make. And then you can also differentiate what you need to make versus, I've made this distinction before, right? You get a sense of what you need to make in order to not have money be a problem in your context. And then once you take care of that, then money can just be an opportunity, and you can make better alternative use decisions, right? That you've set yourself up where if you're desperate, then it's so important to make money that you need to kind of do anything within, maybe within some kind of reason, but really hardly. If you absolutely need money, there's not a lot that you have to draw, where you can draw the line, right? And I don't have to get extreme. I just even mean with just like what kind of clients you take on, or things like that, or just even how you beat yourself up mentally, right? So people think about making money, but then part of an example of when I talk about dealing with context, which and again you cannot be a master strategist unless you get more and more practiced with finding what in the context is important. Now, to do that, you don't have to look about randomly. What you do is you pull on logical threads, right? So, like you're not groping about blindly. If you want to make $10,000 a month or more, then it's logically related. If you just pull on the thread, you'll get to the idea of spending, right? Spending is related to money and making money in a number of ways, right? Because you'll start to think, all right, why do I like, and when do I want to reach it? Or you'll realize that it has to do with just ego. Like, well, I'll be impressed with myself, or my spouse, or my friends, or my parents will be proud of me and look at me with that look that I like, right? And some people, they'll say when they talk about goals, like some gurus, they'll say you need like a reason greater than yourself and so on and so forth. Really, I disagree with that. But what you need is a reason where the alternative use decision is favorable. So if it's going to make you feel good, if your parents are proud of you, then you'll have all the motivation you need, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as what you have to do for that isn't like worse, right? Right? If the cost benefit is in favor, then you'll be motivated. Let's say my wife wants a remodeled kitchen, right? I had this come up years ago, and not in a bad way. Let's just say it would make her happy, and you love your wife, and that would be nice, right? You care about someone, you want to see them have nice stuff that they would like, right? I'm not talking about like some kind of negative expectation, whatever. Let's just say it's a positive thing where your spouse is happy and loves you and will stay with you and isn't complaining, but a nicely remodeled kitchen would make them happy. Then you get a sense of that, and you can make a decision on what it's worth doing for that and what it isn't worth doing for, right? You make alternative use, right? You get a sense of the benefit, and then you have then you can make good decisions about what cost you pay in order to get the benefit, and of course you want the cost to be less than the benefit. But you're not even in the ball game with thinking like that until you do think like that, until you put things that way. And that's why once you understand that, that's when finding out, well, what do I need so I won't be desperate matters so much. Because when you're desperate, you'll do pretty much anything. You have to pretty much ignore the cost. You'll pay any cost, right, to have a certain amount of money. I'm not saying you should or that you will pay any cost, but to some degree you'll pay a lot, right, if you're just desperate. And then if you get confused and act desperate when you're not desperate, then you're going to once again not be a good strategist, because you're going to make wrong alternative use decisions. You're going to pay as if you're desperate when you're not, right? And if you just think in terms of buying goods, like buying like a refrigerator that you want, if you buy it like you're super desperate to have a refrigerator in the next hour, then you're probably going to pay more and get a worse refrigerator, right? Same thing with making money. If your mind is still thinking that you're desperate just based on templates and associations, right? Just kind of rigid thinking, right? Running scripts in your mind. Then you're going to make all kinds of wrong decisions. You'll be like, oh yeah, this guy's going to pay me money, so I'm going to agree to take him on as a client or her on as a client, right? Without really having the right agreement in place and the right clarity ahead of time, because you still think you're desperate when you're not. All right, so our takeaway so far. Let's write one here. Say takeaway is understanding context plus, not only, but plus how it relates to being a strategist, right? And if you're ignoring context, if you're just trying to find the content, the plugin, right, the step-by-step plan, the so-called strategy, but it's just a recipe, right? If strategy is basically used as a synonym for recipe, that is a valid meaning in culture, right? But it's not. Don't confuse it with strategy in terms of something that's going to be particularly helpful in life, being a strategist. I'm not going to get too into this, but another great thing that can help you with context is to be able to have clarity regarding words and their meanings and just clear thought in general, where you're not changing the meaning of what things mean. I'll give you a quick example, though, is this word strategy, right? There's two wholly different meanings. They're sort of related a little bit by topic, but there's the meaning where strategy means recipe, right, or plan in terms of step-by-step plan, versus the idea of strategy in terms of like using good strategy, not using a good strategy, but using good strategy, which means making good alternative use decisions of limited resources. If we don't realize that distinction, then we can use the word strategy and switch our meanings around. And as we're trying to think about strategy, we accidentally use it to mean one thing in one sentence, and then we're thinking about it later, like someone will say, like, okay, I got to use good strategy. But then their mind will just use the meaning of recipe, and they'll never occur to them that they need to make good alternative use decisions, which would then mean that they would have to understand the context better. That might never occur to them because they're not thinking clearly with distinguishing what their words mean. And defining words is not a very effective strategy. You need to build the meanings of your words in a different way than just defining them. That a little bit is like when I talk about boundaries, you can't just define boundaries in the sense of by fiat, just saying, well, here's what the boundary is going to be. Instead, you need to build or uncover or discover where a real natural, sensible boundary is. Similarly with words, they have to be built. Now that I'm just giving you a hint there. I don't think that'll suffice to clear it all up for you. But at least it gives you a hint on something you can build on in your context. And it's something that will have an impact on your money getting, quality of life, relationships, everything. If you learn to not have words just switch their meaning without you realizing it. Okay, I have some other things I can talk about here, but let me go to the Facebook group and see if there's anything we need to talk about yet as part of discussion. This idea of context, I've scratched the surface, or I've delved in a few places today, but overall it's an extraordinarily key idea, including us understanding together more and more about like red flags or the kind of tug of war between, and it's kind of a rational tug of war. It's not your mind. The point of saying that you're not your mind isn't all screwed up. What's important is to understand what your mind does and what it doesn't do, and where your mind is going to reliably do things well and where it's going to reliably screw up. Your mind is going to reliably screw up big time when it comes to importance and impact, which also means it's going to screw up regarding alternative use decisions, because alternative use of limited resources involves impact of those resources, which relates to importance. And your mind tends to get that wrong. Your mind tends to want to go kind of after a goal kind of single-mindedly. You know how goals can take over in the moment and feel so important, right? Things that are psychologically near feel important. I'm repeating myself from things I've taught in the past, but that's in rigging the game. We're kind of doing things from scratch here. Your mind treats psychological nearness like either visually near to you, or there's a person that they're in your same room. How they feel, what they think is important, is going to feel very important compared to someone that's not near into your mind. That's kind of a very non-contextual way of determining importance, right? It's literally kind of anti-contextual, right? It's whatever is closest in time and space and shouting the most loudly, biggest, right? That's how your mind is going to, by default, determine importance. The real way to determine how to spend alternative resources and make good alternative use decisions of resources is to understand the greater context, so you can get a sense of the real actual impact, right? Make sure I don't have an open thread here. So I was talking about context and strategy. I was saying that just this idea of context and the idea of this tug of war between rationally wanting to get into flow. That the author that wrote the book Flow, right, and really was studied a lot, Csikszentmihalyi, and just type in Flow, author of Flow, into Google. I'm not going to bother trying to put his name up. It looks like it's spelled like Mihaly, Csikszentmihalyi, or whatever. But anyhow, he concluded that sort of the point of life was to try to get into flow, right? And people in flow are happier and such. That isn't wrong if you understand it properly. Yeah, we want to get into flow, but we want to get into flow by having in the near term, we want to properly identify when it's okay to get immersed, when it's okay and appropriate and actually beneficial to get immersed in a defined and kind of safe and cleared out context, right? Where I can for an hour just working on a website, or even for a few months just immerse myself in OMG, learning, building websites, being in flow and not worried about ruining things forever or whatever, right? So we can clear out and stipulate a way where we have a context where we can get into flow, and that's great. But we don't want to try to stay into flow by improperly ignoring context. And even if we're taking 3 months trying to work on websites, we can still take some time out here and there to work on greater context issues, right? Such as the webinars that we have together in rigging the game. So flow is fine, but you need to understand the relationship between flow and the greater context, and that there's a danger to flow, right? If you're watching a movie, you want to get into it, right? And identify. If you're watching a James Bond movie, you identify, right? You feel how James Bond feels, right? And you feel like the problems that he's facing matter. That's going to make the movie more immersive and enjoyable. But if the building's on fire, or if someone, for whatever reason, there was something more important, or that was going to cause a problem, and that was timely, then you would want something to snap you out of flow, so you pay attention to something more important in the context that context is like what you're not paying attention to in the moment, right? What isn't really close and obvious and near. So that relationship between flow and paying attention to context, between planning and implementing and so forth. In all cases, by the way, when do you stop seeking understanding? Never. You kind of always want to be seeking understanding. Even if you're in flow, or going after a particular narrow goal, you still can have your goal framed in terms of your building understanding no matter what happens, right? Right. Either you meet your expectations, or like we talked about in last rig in the game, you have a plan for if you hit your target, and you have a plan for if you don't, right? And when you're measuring progress by understanding, then you're making progress either way. So you always want to measure your progress in terms of understanding. But so this tug of war involving context and understanding that better and better, understanding how and when to be in flow or to be focused, so to speak, in a kind of a narrow way versus being focused on planning or the greater context or looking around or pulling on logical threads to see what in the greater context might be important. Getting through some hellos here, and thank you for all the hellos. Brad asked, David, do you have any particular order of your material that we should go through for people that are new to OMG? No, not really. What happens is I'll do like a series, and then I will complete it, and then I'll sort of from that I'll try to see what I can do about what I think the next series might be helpful. So what'll happen then? The next series will, but I'm balancing out where I'm not. I like to have some new stuff, but then in one sense it builds on the old. In one sense, sometimes I find better ways of saying things. Sometimes I might accidentally say it worse. But it's kind of like in rigging the game right now. I'm talking to people from scratch here. I'm informed in a number of ways by alchemy, but also because alchemy exists, that allows me to do things this way. What you want to do is think of this kind of like, in one sense, like unraveling a knot. And if someone says, well, which strand of the knot should I start with? It doesn't exactly matter because you start with one, but then you have to unravel other strands anyway. I said that this also reminds me about holographic. I said I would explain what I meant for anyone that hasn't heard me explain that. With a hologram, if you have so a hologram can show like a picture of an apple right in the middle of the air. If you shine light through it. If you were to take that little plate that you're shining light through, that's causing the hologram, if you were to cut a little piece out of it and you were to shine light through that, then you would actually see the whole apple, but it'd be a little bit blurrier. So with a hologram, each piece contains the whole, but it's not as clear as when you have more pieces. So pretty much everything I talk about also relates to other stuff that I talk about, and the more you continue, the more of a framework you'll have where it'll seem like I'm making more sense, when in fact I kind of fade in and out of making sense. No, in all seriousness, it'll no matter what make more sense. Even the same exact webinar, re-listening to it will often feel like you haven't heard any of it before, and you'll get a whole big benefit out of it, which is why I don't mind repeating myself at times. But I never, I'm always kind of, making this stuff from scratch in a sense, right? I have my notes, my outline, and I kind of create them pretty freshly. I don't pull out notes from before and try to rehash them just for the sake of appearing live or anything like that. Suleiman says, I have read the works of many deep thinkers. These have been people of the past and they're all dead. David's the only one I know who thinks this deep and is alive. Good. I'm glad I have that going for me. I'm alive and they're all dead. I win. No, I'm just having fun. And shares all this with us. What a treat. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that very much, Suleiman. Rebecca says, my parents and my partner's parents both stayed together. This is what I was talking about, the norms and standards, right? And how they're like these invisible tug on our goals. Pinch yourself. Yep, I'm good. I'm alive. My parents and partner's parents both stayed together for over 60 years, but both sets argued all the time. Right, so that's another standard and norm, right? That it's normal to be together, but it's normal to, have these issues, right? So my partner and I both come from families whose parents stayed together, but we both resolved not to argue. Right, good. So you've intentionally tried to you want to not have that be a norm and standard, and so you kind of reinforce a different norm and standard with each other and resolve issues before they blow up. So maybe we are the evolutionary upgrade. Well, no, I mean, you're just intentionally working on setting a different norm and standard, and you're helping to reinforce that with each other. And since you both agree on that, you feel like you're more, your mind would naturally feel like pulling in norms and standards about relationships from your spouse over time, especially would make sense to it. But that's excellent that you've done that. That's exactly right. Staying together, even if you hate each other, is not always healthy. staying together because you fear hell is not a good reason. Yeah. I wasn't saying what I was saying in order to say that everyone should always stay together in every case. I didn't mean to imply that it's necessarily better to stay together. Of course, by default, all things being equal, it's better to stay together. In every case, right? Plan A. One of the nice heuristics to have figured out in life is that by all things being equal, Plan A is superior to Plan B. Right? You want a compelling reason where there's a clear difference. Clearly, better to do Plan B before you switch to Plan B. That'll save you a lot of pain in the butt in life, knowing that. Congratulations, Rebecca. That's awesome. First time on a webinar. Excellent. Hope you don't plan on sleeping or having your mind racing for a while afterwards. Excellent. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to have you as part of OMG. I think it's a great program this year. A lot of great sentiment. Mahir says, I have 2 questions. Sometimes I abuse weed and smoke multiple times a day. Although I can work fine on it, I don't think I'm nearly as productive as when I'm sober. And I'm not an expert, but I would tend to agree that it's more of an illusion when people think that they function better on weed. Probably not. Right? Probably better when you're not on it. Although I just graduated, it has become such a habit, right? It's such a standard and norm in universities. Universities have a bazillion problems, which is why I'm not really in favor of going to university or college for people. It's an individual decision. There's times when it may, on balance, be worth the cost, but also people should be aware of the cost and be ready to counteract it, such as things like this. Become such a habit during university that I feel that my mind, when it's high, is a part of me or my identity, so as to why it feels so hard to quit. Right. It's more like a norm or a standard than identity, but identity can mean your norms and standards. When I use the word identity, I mean something a little bit different, but common usage of identity is basically a synonym for norms and standards. So, in a fine way. It's possible that a bad idea of my high mind identity got into subconscious, therefore causing an urge to smoke. And this is a great example of how awesome it is to be aware of this idea of norms and standards, right, as these kind of super goals. People have some sense of this, right, and people want to make things normal. Like in politics, they want to make certain things normal and make other things not normal, right? The whole idea of politically correct speech is that certain things shouldn't be normal. I'm not endorsing it, of course, but some things need to be treated as abnormal and shunned for that reason. But having real clarity on how this works with these norms and standards, and then what you want to do is you want to go and win the game in the greater context. You want to win the game by operating on your norms and standards rather than trying to fight upstream without operating on the norms and standards and just trying to change things right in the moment. So you want to have as many signals in your environment, including your peer group, that make it feel like it's not normal to be high. And OMG probably helps, right? And OMG, I would say, there's a lot of marijuana smoking, as I said, it's like kind of in some of the affiliate marketplace, probably among the younger guys. But in my sense in OMG, it's not that common at all with people smoking. And validate my own identity, right? And again, you're validating kind of your own standards or kind of the norms that you feel. Or feel the need for certainty to have escape due to fear of the unknown, even though me as the awareness of consciousness field knows that I could triple my success if I was willing to sacrifice a short pleasure of the high, which only my subconscious desires because the dopamine spikes are aligned with the wrong ideas. How do I actualize myself after I have thought out clearly? Yeah, so what you do is you can intellectually figure out ideals. And I'll be looking to kind of do a kind of sub-series within Rigging the Game where we'll kind of specifically take you through kind of a whole model with goals. But when you identify an ideal, one thing you can always try is to go straight for something. So I don't like if I identify where I want to go, I don't immediately head in the opposite direction and start looking around in the context, right? I first get a sense of, can I just go and accomplish this directly, right? So, but if that's not happening, if there's a pretty clear norm and standard that's pulling you away, then that's when you need to operate on that in a number of ways. So there's who you associate with. There's how do we do this? Hypnosis, for example, operates on that level where it can make something feel like not normal, right? Not pleasurable. The longer you go without smoking, then that'll make it easier, of course. And then you can look at it that way too, as a little bit of an extra thing that can motivate you. But the idea is to try to hit it from a number of angles and vectors until you win, right? So you kind of keep operating in the greater context until you win. And you can win anything that way by kind of getting outside of it. I'll probably have some better or additional thoughts over time on that. If I can get more, when does the theory start canceling our contradictions and eliminating them in terms of the way that what you need to do with a contradiction is you need to have a foothold with something that you know. So, for example, examples of things you could know is, all right, I know I want to be more efficient, right? Like I'd rather, if I'm going to be going after a goal, I'd rather do so more effectively rather than less. Let's say effective rather than efficient. Now, like efficient, you might not know, right? Like maybe you don't need to be very efficient, right? I mean, if you could make six figures and get to six figures in 4 months without smoking, and you get there in 12 months with smoking, then maybe it's okay to smoke because you get there in 12 months. And someone might say, well, David, why would you say that? Well, you see, you have to find the real stuff, the real boundaries. Identifying a weak point, like a weak link argument, isn't going to help you. So just saying, well, it'll be more efficient if I don't smoke, might not help you, because maybe you don't really need to be efficient, or maybe you do, but your mind hasn't linked up where it needs to be. What you want to get a sense of is what definitely is going to be suboptimal about smoking. Now, if we put it a different way, if I said, look, I want to get to a certain income level, but I'm only willing to work 4 hours a day, 4 days out of the week, then you're restricting yourself in a way. Well, you know what's going to happen is high-powered people are not going to want to team up with you. That might be relevant, it might not be, but it might be important. For me, teaming up with high-powered people has been critical to my income. It's not necessarily critical for everyone. But again, you have to find kind of natural things for you that matter. But you're putting some pretty major restrictions on yourself. If you are going to be smoking, then you're going to kind of hope that the path to your success lies within that kind of artificial restriction of doing it while getting high a lot. And do you want to take that risk? But I still don't think that I have enough of an answer there to solve it for you, but that gives you more of an indication. I might have some other thoughts in the future. When to talk about seeking understanding and its synonym of rigging the game, as well as their verbs of seeking clarity and rigging, should they be thought of as synonyms, or should they be thought of as a method of winning or stackable ideas? That is and this is Mahir, of course, has listened to a lot of my training, so this might be a little bit convoluted for people that are just hearing me. But that's okay. There's going to be times when it'll kind of push you or expand you. Feeling a little bit confused is actually perfectly legitimate for learning. When the mind goes into a confused state, if you embrace that, then it kind of opens itself up in a useful way. So there's nothing wrong with feeling confused a bit. You don't need to feel confused all the time, right? But as part of the whole balance, it's perfectly reasonable. That is, by getting clarity about what concept box to belong in or what framework to mentally live in, you automatically win by default and have an unfair advantage in life. I didn't quite, although I'm familiar with these concepts in general, not sure that all clicked for me either. should rigging the game, seeking understanding, um, well, I think the real question here lies in something that I'm going to be developing, which is when do we look in the greater context and when do we just get kind of in flow and ignore the context except for just what's kind of in front of it. When you're in flow, you're right, you're ignoring a lot of the context, right? And that's kind of fun. The brain enjoys that. It's like you get to do what a lot of people think of as like the way to succeed, which is you kind of navigate your way to a goal, right? You just kind of make adjustments and some twists and turns and what feels like smart kind of moving around and observing and so forth until you hit your goal. That is actually only going to get you to a goal. Like navigating your way to a goal is only going to work if the context in which you're navigating, if the sea that you're navigating in, the ocean that you're navigating in, contains your goal, right? And it doesn't contain any whammies or icebergs or whatever that's going to fully take you out on your way to the goal, right? So this idea that you can again navigate to a goal is actually only true in some circumstances, and a lot of people believe that will help you achieve anything you want in life is just by navigating. But again, there's two problems with that navigation model, or that like airplane making adjustments model, until you hit your target, and that is things that could take you out altogether, or take out your vehicle that you're using altogether, right? Like if you have navigating a ship metaphor, if something busts your ship, so it can no longer sail, that doesn't work. And the other thing is that you might just fully not be able to succeed within a context. There might be something outside of what you're realizing that's tripping you up. Again, you can often see this with dating, illustrate a lot of what I'm saying. Sometimes people have issues with how they act or self-image or just being not groomed very well or having various interpersonal issues where they can't navigate their way to a relationship that they want. Right? There's things in the greater context of their mind. And generally speaking, people can't navigate their way to being happy in life. They try to, but there's problems that are in context that they're not aware of and that we're addressing. Stuff that we talk about is that kind of stuff. But people just literally can't be happy, and they don't realize they need to change the game. They keep thinking they can navigate their way to happiness if they just accomplish enough goals. Right? Money really is a great way to get all kinds of extra good stuff in life, by the way. I can attest to that. But the reason people say it can't buy happiness is because if there's issues with your understanding of life in the greater context of life, then you can't buy your way to happiness. Once you get that greater context stuff taken care of, then money is really nifty, by the way. You can buy all sorts of nifty little things that you'll enjoy. Plus, they'll be easier to make. So it both is and isn't true that money can buy a certain amount of happiness, right? But definitely by having more money rather than less, I personally can buy stuff that will improve my day consistently rather than not. Right? It's definitely more fun to drive a Rolls Royce Dawn than it is to drive like a Honda Civic. Someone could say, well, can't you be happy either way? You can have no problems maybe either way, or minimize them, all the ones you can minimize in your life. And be happy in that sort of sense. But then once you're happy either way, then you're still better off having the Rolls Royce, if that makes sense for some of you. There might be some people where driving a Honda Civic driving a Rolls Royce doesn't make them happier than driving a Honda Civic. But there's going to be a lot of people where it will. Just like eating in a fairly decent restaurant might be nicer, or having more, having $50 to spend between themselves and their spouse on a meal, most people are going to be able to more consistently enjoy their meals that way than if they had a budget of $10. Right? That might not be the case for everyone in every case, but certainly there's certainly going to be plenty of people where it will be true that if they can consistently spend $50 a day or $50 a meal, they're going to get a better one. If you extrapolate that out to 1,000, you might not get a better experience for 1,000 versus 50. I have no idea. Right? It doesn't extrapolate infinitely, but it does expand to a certain degree. And by me saying that, just talking that way operates on your norms and standards. which makes it easier for you to make money by me saying that. That has nothing to do with me kind of doing some kind of underground, subtle brag or some crap like that. Just helps you make money by me putting it that way. Right, and you have alternative use decisions, right? And this is why I say strategy. It's possible that smoking actually increases the quality of your life overall. It's possible that one way to see it properly is to get off it for a year. I have a friend who thought that smoking was improving their quality of life. I don't even know. I have to tell you, they got off it sometimes. I don't even know if now they're at the point where sometimes they do it and it improves their quality of life a little bit here and there, or they do it a lot or whatever. But you're not going to. It's going to be pretty hard to judge unless you get off it a bit. I've done that with coffee, and my conclusion is that drinking coffee improves my quality of life versus not drinking coffee. At least in the short term, it certainly makes it easier in a lot of cases for me to. The whole experience of it helps me to work on these ideas. It's in certain cases. And there might be some, but then again, it might improve the quality of my life within the context that I currently have, and there might be a greater context I haven't discovered yet, and then I'm open to discovering where I'm happier without coffee, and that entirely might be true, right? So all of that might be the case. Interesting. So what Adrian wrote might be helpful too. Yeah, there's no better. I can't think of a better place to listen to music in the entire world than in a Rolls Royce, which is fun. Context for SEO agencies: competitors, economy, prospects, belief. Yes, I would say, in a sense, for some of those, no. I would say the context for an SEO agency, for any business, product. That's why I talk about product, traffic, and conversion. And you want to identify your product, your traffic for your own agency, like prospective clients, and your conversion, your sales process once you start talking to a prospective client, and then your product. That's one good place to look for context is knowing those three things. And to also that narrows it down. There's nowhere else you have to look besides product, traffic, and conversion. And you can also know that regarding someone else's business, that's what they need as well. Let me talk about competition. That leads into a slide that I have. Okay. And let me also ground us in the law of implication here. So let's think how to do this. I'll go through the slide quickly and then show how it relates to the law of implication as a whole. Okay. It's my conclusion based on the understanding that I have, which is pretty large. It might not be totally full, but I'm very confident, I could say, and in a good position to be fairly expert on this. And I'm not being sarcastic with anything that I say there. I am intentionally kind of softening what I'm saying, and I'm not saying it's absolute total certainty, but some of this I will have. But not thinking in terms of competition at all, I find to be extremely helpful. Even with SEO, in essence. Now, people that there's websites that you might previously think of as competition that might be ranking for keywords that you want to rank, and you can learn from them. But identifying them as your competition will actually often make it harder for you to learn from those very sites. Like Greg will call them, or Cotton will call them competition, but they're kind of just talking normally, like just kind of common usage of words. But I know that neither one of them really think of them as their competition, if that makes sense. They just do what they do, and they end up winning, which involves solving a problem, really, not like getting traffic for their clients. So even if they kind of colloquially refer to them as competition, as a matter of fact, if you think of them as your competition, then you're going to have cognitive bias towards wanting to think of them as weak. And I see this in my own niche. If we think of somebody as competition, then we want to poo-poo their conversion strategy or things that they do or their product, and it makes it harder to learn from them because we'd rather think how they're kind of silly and not that good, right? If we don't think in terms of competition or competitiveness, then it's easier to look at things with fresh eyes and not like sour grapes, and learn from what other people trying to solve a similar problem are doing well, right? And they might be doing some things wrong too, but either way. So I wrote here that money getting is about trading on the solving of a problem. Remember also I said everything I'm talking about is holographic. And so another thing that you're going to get is just my thinking process here. It might look on the surface like logic, and it is, but it really involves clarity and understanding. Right? Logic really involves not contradicting yourself or keeping the meaning. It involves clarity of thought and not having the meanings of your words and your ideas keep switching around or blurring. All right? It's not like a set of axioms. So anyway, I'm kind of demonstrating my way of thinking while I'm doing this holographically. All right, so money getting is about trading on the solving of a problem, right? You're getting paid for solving a problem, and a problem might not be relieving pain. It might be helping someone get to like pleasure or happiness. Either way, right? But when I say solving a problem, I don't mean problem like in a negative sense. I mean problem just in a sort of neutral sense. Like a math problem isn't necessarily negative. It's just a thing to be solved, right? Okay. So you're solving a problem. So now, how can there be competition? You might say, well, David, what do you mean? Well, if I'm trying to solve a problem, like if I'm trying to get traffic to a business, or if I'm trying to fight crime, or if I'm trying to help people make money, like I do with OMG, ultimately I'm trying to solve a different type of problem, right, in the world. But at least within the context of OMG, that business helps solve the problem, right, with people making money as entrepreneurs. If I think of that there's other people I'm trying to compete with, then what does that even mean? I mean, those people by logic are people trying to solve the same problem, presumably. Either they're just fraudsters or they're trying to solve the same problem, right? And so what do I not want the problem to be solved while simultaneously wanting it to be solved, right? Like, if I'm thinking in terms of competition, it's like I don't want them to solve the problem. I want me to solve the problem. So it's like I don't really want the problem solved. I just want to be the one to solve it for people and get paid. But then again, it has that ripple effect of the contradiction, where I don't really want the very problem to be solved that I'm trying to solve. It's like if you supposedly love somebody that you're in a relationship with, but you don't really want them to be happy from a gift that someone else gives, especially if it's from the same, gender and age category as you, right? If you love someone, but that's a contradiction in loving someone, right? If you love someone, you want them to be happy, right? I might not want of course I don't want my wife like running off with somebody else, but if someone else like gives them a gift or spends some time with them or talks to them and that is enjoyable for her, then jealousy doesn't make a lot of sense. Like thinking in terms of competition that way doesn't make sense, and it makes you less attractive anyway, right? If you think in terms of competition, you're also measuring yourself against another person or entity or business or whatever. But why would you do that? That's a bizarre norm or standard. You're trying to solve a problem. What is how well someone else is doing at solving it have to do with solving the problem, right? You're scattered. You're going after different goals that are kind of blurred and confused, right? It takes your focus off of stuff, right? It's like if you're running a race and you're looking to your right or your left, then you're not focused on, getting to the finish line as effectively as possible. So I realized that like there could be certain cases where in practice focusing on competition can kind of spur you onward and so forth. But even in a case like that, you could come up with something better that would, if you could be spurred onward by competition in the first place, it means that you're operating from a norms and standards perspective in the first place, and you could probably set your norms and standards in an even better place than wherever your competition is. So a ripple effect is you're gonna see it. There's a desperation if I'm trying to make money by solving a problem, but I don't really want that problem to be solved, except for maybe if I solve it, that's desperate, because now I don't want people to be better off, right? Like I have to, if I'm solving a problem, then I have to kind of believe that solving it has a benefit, right? So I have to believe that it's better to have the problem solved. And then if I at the same time I don't want that problem to be solved from people unless I'm taking care of it, then I'm wanting people to be like kind of worse off, right, compared to where they could be. And that's a very desperate place to come from. I'm so desperate that I want other people to be worse off than they could be, right? That's a very desperate place. As a matter of fact, it's so desperate you never really even need people to be worse off, you know. So you have to believe that you're helpless, that life is so scarce and rigged in a bad way that the only way for you to just even claw your way to what you need is for other people to be relatively worse off. And then you're believing in scarcity, and that gets implied at a very deep level. The idea of the world being scarce, where there's a fundamentally unlimited amount of good, is such a bleak and false thing, and it's so deeply contextual. It's such a foundational idea, because the idea of the world being rigged for abundance is such an important. Again, it's so foundational, inherently foundational to how the world works. It colors every other decision, every other thing about the world. The world is either rigged ultimately so that we can, if we seek understanding, things will work out wonderfully, or it's not. So where no matter if we seek understanding, exercise our free will, we're still screwed, or other people are screwed. That's horrible. That's sick, right? That's already hell. By the common usage of the term, I'm not making a statement about hell's existence one way or the other. I'm saying, colloquially speaking, that's hell. So it's a terrible place to come from, and you'll come to all sorts of terrible conclusions. And the minute you believe in competition, and I'm not even saying that you yourself, and I'm not saying that in that question, maybe the usage of the word competition was just different. Maybe he was using it like I said colloquially, like Greg and Cotton might use it often with websites. So I'm not correcting the question so much as using that as a launching point to talk about this, which I meant to talk about anyway. But I want everyone to know this, and new people who haven't heard me say this to NHB, it's so critical to not be thinking in terms of competition, not be thinking in terms, or some people will say, oh, I feel behind, like because other OMGers are ahead of me in some way. That's all thinking in terms of competition, norms, and standards. What the hell does solving a problem have to do with how well someone else is solving it? If the problem still exists, it's not solved yet, right? So opportunity exists, right, if the problem exists. But then if the problem exists, you want to just purely want it solved. And don't believe you're so helpless. If the problem gets solved, if you have the attitude, look, if this problem just gets solved so well that it no longer is a money-making opportunity, then great. That's good, and I'll do something else. I'm not helpless. You see, that's great. The more you imply that you're not helpless, in the sense that you can adapt. You don't need to imply that you already have life all figured out. That's not helpful. I don't mean that you imply that you already have it all, right? You don't want to imply that the context is already perfect, because it's not, until it is. And then you're going to have that manic thing trying to believe something that isn't true. But you can believe that you'll adapt, that you'll seek understanding and adapt. That's good, right? That's anti-helpless, and it's wonderful. The greater idea of the law of implication, which what I just talked about takes advantage of or doesn't contradict. The law of implication has two ways of stating it, right? And this is kind of my training, my brand or whatever. But also these are unique proprietary statements in essence. And not that someone else couldn't have figured them out, but I haven't come across someone that has in this way exactly. The law of implication is almost like in one sense can be stated as a corollary or an adjustment or a clarification of the law of attraction, right? If we just take the law of attraction, what we have is that, understood properly, will attract like our thoughts operate as like magnets on what we get. when I say understood properly, we also should understand we're not omnipotent or all-knowing, and therefore there's an environment out there that's partially beyond our control in the moment, at least. And so we're not going to manifest exactly what our thoughts are attracting because there's an environment, there's luck, there's stuff outside of our control. And if someone says, well, David, I don't believe in luck, you're misunderstanding me. What I'm saying is, in this sense, is definitely correct. Unless you are omnipotent and omniscient, all-knowing and all-powerful, then from your relative to you, there is luck. You do not control, it's literally logically necessarily true, that if you're not all-powerful and all-knowing, you don't control everything in the moment. And therefore, no matter what your magnets are, no matter what your attractors are, no matter what your thoughts are, because the environment has an impact as well, you're not... the magnet will pull, and that pull is real, and that pull is coming from your mind, let's say, that you can affect. But the pull doesn't equal the result, right? If I punch a building, there's a real force that goes from my hand into the wall of the building, but it might not knock the building down, right? So there's a push. In that case, there's a punch, and the punch is real, but that won't knock down the building because I'm not omnipotent, and the power of the building to stay where it is stronger. Right? If you're sick and you try to attract health into you, it doesn't mean that you'll instantly cure yourself necessarily, right? And I'm not saying you won't, but you may not as well. And this is important because when bad things happen to people, we don't want to believe that it's all just because of their them screwing up. It's very important, and you don't want to beat yourself up either that way. So, implying that you're omnipotent and all powerful is silly because you're not, and you're gonna drive yourself basically insane that way. You're gonna come up with all kinds of contradictory thinking. It's not gonna help you. So believing in luck, so to speak, is not a problem because, and people might say, well, I make my own luck. You don't make your own luck. You make your own attractors, right? Like you optimize what you can optimize, and then of course you're gonna get better results on the whole, right? It's like magic that I played, right, professionally and rose to the top of the world in. There's luck in magic. You shuffle a deck, you draw things at random. But of course there's strategy in optimizing all the things that you can optimize, and then of course you end up ahead, right? So when you understand that you don't have full control, then you realize to focus on what you can control, which is going to be rooted in seeking understanding and improving on that. Right? When you try to convince yourself that you control stuff that you don't control, or that you know stuff you don't know, then you get more of what you don't know. You get more of what you don't control. When you focus on what you genuinely do know because you can understand it, then you get more understanding, more knowing, and more control. What I just said there was very important. So believing in luck, so to speak, is understood properly is not a problem. Relying on luck, of course, just being arrogant or silly, obviously that's not helpful, right? You wouldn't say I'm not going to optimize, I'm not going to control what I can control, understand what I can understand, just blind luck. Obviously, I'm not saying that. Okay, first I had to state a good way of seeing the law of attraction, which is that what your thinking will attract stuff into your life. But again, you need to understand that the environment has its own pull external to you, and that the combination of those two factors will get you what you get. But there's extremely important and unknown further clarification that you need to understand, which is that you don't actually attract the intent of your thoughts. You don't attract what you think your thoughts are saying or whatever. You actually, the real magnets on your life, the real attractors that are being sent out and pulling on reality to create results for better or worse in your life, is based on the implication of your thoughts, what's logically has to be true based on what you're thinking. So when you believe in competition, I just took you through what you can logically go from there. Believing in competition in the wrong way has all sorts of negative, unhelpful, maladaptive ripple effects or attractions that you're going to pull in. You're believing that you're relatively helpless, that the world is scarce, that you don't really want the problem solved that you're trying to solve to make money, et cetera, et cetera. Those magnets are gonna be pulling on things, and they're gonna sabotage you, even as you also do things that are helpful, right? So you're gonna have a mixed bag of vectors, of magnets, of attractors. As you, on your own and with my help, get the ripple effects of your thinking straightened out, including this example with competition, where it's so critically important to believe in abundance, to believe that ultimately things are rigged so that if you seek understanding, if you maximize your free will, etc., then you can, it's like the middle context is screwed up. The greater context is okay. Ultimately, the world's abundant. In practice, it's wasteful, but it's not scarce. In practice, all sorts of things are screwed up in your own mind and in the world. And we need to fix those things. We fix them by seeking understanding. And I'm not just talking about saving the world here. Everything that you want in terms of your day-to-day stuff or your urgent goals, relationships, money, etc., it's all most efficiently gotten the same way. Okay, so I talked about what was on this slide. The other statement of the law of implication is that if you focus on what you can know, which opens up a whole can of worms, well, what the heck is that? But of course, it is all holographic. I'm demonstrating how to do that, and I sometimes talk about it directly. Focus on what you can know. And then what I'm talking about is what you can know about what's important. And about what's good, right? Importance inherently involves what leads to good, right? You want impact for what's going to make you happier, right? You could have importance relative to a goal, impact that's going to help achieve a goal. Then as long as your goals are going to lead to good, then you're okay, right? If there's a misalignment between your goals and what's going to actually make you happy, then of course that's silly. You want to figure that out, right? Obviously, if you could have a genie or whatever to give you wishes, and you can get whatever you wish for except you're guaranteed to be unhappy, then that wouldn't be a deal you would take, right? Obviously, ultimately, you want to be happy, right? So any kind of goal achievement has to take that into account. Often people wave their hand at that and act as if it doesn't really matter, or that of course you'll be happy if you can achieve your goals, but that's not the case. It's a separate issue. Anyhow, if you focus on what you can know about what's important, what has the most impact, and you can either have that impact be related to goals which don't make you happy, or you can have that impact be ultimately related to happiness, and then you get what you get, right? You either achieve goals and you may or may not be happy, or you get just happiness itself and lots of good stuff on the way. But one way or the other, you focus on what you can know, and then what's going to happen? You're going to get more of what you can actually know. People rebel against this because they want to know stuff sooner. It's all not happening fast enough. So they just want to convince themselves they know all sorts of stuff they don't know, so they can take action and blah, blah, blah. What happens when you focus on what you don't know? What happens when you want to convince yourself that you control stuff you don't? Well, you're focusing on stuff then that's actually outside of your control, or things you don't know. What do you get more of in that case? More of what you don't know, more of what's outside your control. You have less and less control in life. So by trying to go directly for control, you get less control. In other words, let me clarify that. By trying to convince yourself you control stuff. This is an example of this is with a luck. By trying to convince yourself there's no luck and you can dictate any outcome. That's not that all you're going to get is worse and worse. You're going to get worse at strategy, worse at understanding your mind. It's just not going to help you. You're going to beat the heck out of yourself psychologically, feel ashamed if you don't accomplish something, and you're going to have cognitive bias towards thinking that you're already super. And get arrogant, and that's going to be unattractive, and you're going to judge other people when they don't get good results because you're sure there's no environmental factors. It's just all you get what you deserve, exactly what you deserve now, and so you're always judging other people, just more and more, and then your life gets more miserable. You have less control. You lose control of your relationships on top of your results, and you have less and less. So trying to believe that you control stuff you don't, trying to agreeing with your mind that you know stuff that you don't is going to create a negative spiral in your life. You're already having some problems from that right now, I can assure you. because it's worked into everyone in our culture consistently. But as you just start to have a seed, the smallest amount of what you can know and building from there, then you will get more of that, and you'll be able to understand more and know more for properly and for real. When you focus on what you really can control, you'll have more that's within your control, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the principle of use. You to learn or to get more of anything, if you use something in the right way, if you use it in a positive sense, then you'll get more of whatever that is. But then, of course, if you're using bad stuff, then you'll get more of that, like I just illustrated. So 2 statements of the law of implication. One is that you attract into your life results based on the implication of your thoughts. I've also in the past in alchemy I used the example of like the Affordable Care Act, right? Obamacare. Calling something the Affordable Care Act, this I'm not making a political statement, I'm just illustrating what I mean by the implications of your thoughts versus the supposed intent. Calling something the Affordable Care Act does not in and of itself reduce the price of medical care or medical insurance, right? What reduces or increases, what's the actual effect of the bill going to be? It's going to be the logical ripple effects of the actual contents of the bill, right? And how they're implemented. So the implication of the bill, the Obamacare, is what's going to what's going to actually determine what the bill leads to, what the results are, not the name of the bill, not the supposed intent of the bill. You see? Same thing with any of your thoughts. If you supposedly intend to make money, or you supposedly intend to solve a problem, but you believe that you don't want your competition to solve it better than you or before you do, then that also implies you don't really want the problem to be solved. It also implies that you don't want other people to be better off, right? Which implies that you're desperate and helpless. When you want everyone to be better off, then you imply that you're more powerful, and you will attract more. The fact that you'll attract yourself to be more powerful, in reality, in a good way, by wanting other people to be better off. You'll also attract abundance into your life because you're acting on the idea of abundance. When you act in abundance, again, that's when your thoughts imply abundance. And abundance doesn't mean plenty; it means more is more. It means good ideas, good actions lead to more good, and bad ideas and bad actions lead to more waste. You can't fix a bad action. You can dissolve it. You can have it not happen in the future, but you can do good stuff that then swamps out the bad. But bad doesn't lead to good. Seeking understanding about a supposedly bad situation or a mistake can lead to good, but that's because you're seeking understanding. The bad didn't lead to good. The good of seeking understanding led to good. You can seek understanding without making a mistake, without having something bad. You can search for a silver lining without there being something. A cloud, like a bad cloud. You don't need the bad cloud to seek a silver lining or seek understanding. So seek understanding without having to have problems, and you won't need to have problems. If you only learn and grow when you fall on your face and make mistakes and have bad things happen, then the implication is you need bad things to happen, so you're going to have a magnet in your life for bad things. If instead you really focus in, and when good stuff happens, you really try to learn from it. Not just get arrogant from it, not just say, oh, I got it handled, but really seek the silver linings. Figure out what it was, besides just the fact that you're special and wonderful already, that caused your success. And you, by seeking understanding there, you're going to get more good, right? Without having to, again, to have the problems in order to... it's fine to pick yourself up if something bad happens, so to speak, but it's even better to just be seeking understanding without needing something bad to happen first. Okay, so the one statement of law of implication is you attract the implications of your thoughts, mixed again tempered by the environmental factors and luck. But of course, you're weighting your dice greatly. You're weighting your luck by doing that in a good way, and obviously you'll keep on getting better and better results by paying attention to having good implications of your thoughts and acting on good implications. And at the core of that is abundance. Um, Anything that implies that someone else is that you're better off if someone else is worse off, or vice versa, is scarcity, and the ripple effects will be terrible. Everything to do with norms and standards and competition has to do with scarcity and has bad ripple effects by the law of implication. By taking the law of implication seriously, that means that learning to think with clarity and learning to pull on the threads of your thoughts and carry them through backwards and forwards. What are the assumptions? Where is it going to lead? That becomes important. Whereas generally people treat that as unimportant. So the greater context of the implications of your thoughts matters once you feel the law of implication. Once you feel like the law of implication is true, now you need to know what the context is of your thoughts. What are the assumptions? What are the implications? What are they going to lead to? So making context feel important when it should feel important is a game changer, because by default it's not going to feel important too much. By default, what's near, not the context, feels more important. That's one meaning of the law of implication. The other meaning of the law of implication or statement of it is focused on what you can know and build from there. Okay, and then that was all good. That I talked about competition. I used that to illustrate the law of implication itself again, and clear thinking some more and so forth. So that's good. That kind of gets me to everything except for force, which I can talk about in the future. But I had a good insight in the last few days about force. I've been thinking about this for years and understanding force versus understanding and when to use force, if ever, and try to make a distinction with that. And I have some good distinctions, and I'll keep working on it before the next rigging the game and get to that. This may be context for conversion then. There is zero competition with agencies. All my competitors teach me stuff, and it's a pretty big ocean out there. Excellent. Great statement. Ripple effect. I feel like a black woman in church. Amen. It's great. Excellent. Super. Or any other enthusiastic person in church. Kevin Statham got a random question. I started thinking recently about what will I do financially and we have about 20 more minutes. Then I have to cut it short at 2 hours for sure. I started thinking recently about what will I do financially when I get to 10K, 20K, and so on per month, savings, investing, and so forth. I know my first thing is building a stable base like you've talked about. I was curious if there's any books or people you recommend looking at in regards to financial plans like you do. I don't know. People like Dave Ramsey. He operates out of a big place here in where I live in Franklin, Tennessee. So he might be helpful. I kind of came up with the annuity thing in my own little world from scratch. I didn't invent annuities for the world, of course. I'm not saying anything that's silly. But just I kind of came up with a concept like this is what I need. And then it turns out that already existed. But they're not talked about that much, with the idea of something that pays you out, about when you're 60. And then it pays you monthly for the rest of your life. You put a certain amount of money into it before that. And that money, you don't really have that money, which is kind of helpful too for anyone kind of trying to go after your assets. One little random thing is that spending some of it in a way that's fun is reasonable to give your mind a sense like the mind makes associations based on nearness in the moment. And so if you have some amount of fun with your money, then it kind of gets to feel the pleasure of making money. People have suggested maybe 10% of it or something like that. You can use 10% or you can just eyeball it, make sure you're buying something you really like. And the way to balance that and not be silly about that is what you don't want to do is anything that's going to make money feel worthless. So you wouldn't blow it. You would just spend it on something that's clearly nice and pleasurable and that you wouldn't buy if you didn't have as much money. One of the things that I did actually when I started making a bunch of money was I said anything to do with food, I'm not going to worry about the price. And now naturally I don't really drink hardly at all, so that's where spending money on supposed food and drink can get out of hand. So naturally I don't spend more than $40 on a meal between myself and my wife together, or maybe 45 or something like that. So it's in the $50 range. So, or we go to Whole Foods and it's fairly expensive. I mean, I'm not telling you should go to Whole Foods. I'm just saying, just in practice, we get a lot of our food there. I'm not saying that that's like super healthy or anything like that, but it's reasonably tasty and nice. And I don't really, for the most part, pay attention to what I spend on food. Like if we want the raspberries or the cherries and they're kind of expensive, like we don't worry about buying them. And then that's great because eating is like a real instantaneous pleasure. And so for pretty relatively cheap compared to the money you're talking about, you can, I mean, maybe that amounts to spending an extra thousand, I don't know, extra what, few hundred to maybe maybe in the outer, maybe 1,000 a month at some point on food. And as long as that is within your price range, like relative to what you're making, it's kind of a good way to do it too. It depends on how much money you're making. I did something interesting with savings. Like a lot of the advice I read about saving, and I talk about this not so much just to talk about the topic, although it's kind of a reasonably important topic, but also just giving you the thought process of it. They'll say, oh, pay yourself first, and you should always get in the habit of saving. And I have to tell you, when I made very little money, like well under 20,000 in a year, and I did that for years in my 20s, I really just didn't have a very good basis for working for myself. Everything that I built through college was based on, had nothing to do with anything that would help me making money. It was all based on a different paradigm, right? That was kind of a dead end for me. I realized that I wasn't going to be very happy in any kind of track that was like a career track. Personally, I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. But anyhow, I made well under $20,000, more closer to 10 than 20 a year for practically 10 years, starting my fourth year of college. It was a lot for while I was in college, and it was fine. So I didn't save anything then, and I even dipped into a little bit of inheritance that I had. I didn't inherit anything that's relevant for my money. It's not like I secretly inherited hundreds of thousands and I managed to live on that amount of money. It wasn't too significant. But I didn't save anything, and my parents would talk about maybe I should save some money. I was like, I can't save money at this amount, but I didn't go into debt either. But it would be irrelevant. And the idea to do it just for the habit, this whole idea of like a slippery slope, sure, it happens a bit, but I mean, the cost of saving, it just really wouldn't be worth it in that case. And then, but once my income became significant, then I ended up spending like 5% of what I made and saving the rest. So, and if I had been trying to save 10 or 20%, I would have had to blow a ton of money. Right. My income pretty much doubled from starting at 50,000. It was like zero one year when I was building certain businesses up prior to a few years before OMG, and then like 50, and then it roughly speaking doubled up to the 2 million range. But even when I was making, like, let's say when I made like around 300,000, the year after I made 100,000, I spent like less than 50, right? And then I spent about, like I was a millionaire and I was living in a townhouse that cost me $185,000 to buy, and I had a Honda Civic, right? But then eventually I got a Rolls Royce and an $800,000 house and so forth. But when I could well afford them, and without like having to do mortgages, it's all paid off, and paid off after paying for retirement and things like that. Anyway, that can give you just some different thinking. Different topic question. So the point is, I didn't save it all. It wasn't a slippery slope. It wasn't some kind of pattern, right? Sure, habits can matter, but like there's a cost benefit to anything, right? When you're a strategist, you think of alternative use of resources rather than just, so there's a little bit of a benefit of supposedly having a habit. But even the habit of saving 10% would have backfired on me. People make all this money, and then something will happen, there'll be a disaster, and they'll be ruined. And I'll be like, well, what the hell were you doing when you're making, like, people will make $1 million here and there, and then they'll have no money left over in a few years. With me, I save virtually all of it, right? When I didn't buy anything significant until I had at least a very baseline plan for the rest of my life, essentially. To not be desperate, because no luxury for me is worth ever being desperate again. That's just so alternative use in both cases. In the one hand, it made no sense to save, on the other, and then later it made sense to save over 90% or more of what I made. And then I'll be at a point where in this year, it doesn't matter one way or the other, whether I save it or blow it. It's just kind of irrelevant at this point. I'm in a little bit of a weird position where I kind of have to make money, because for me not to make money, I'd have to dissolve OMG. So I'm looking for a solution, but I'm not in any rush, right? One way or the other. And the solution is probably just going to be keeping OMG around happily, and me having just like a nice, reasonable role in it. But yeah, like looking at the greater context and making alternative use decisions is what you want to do consistently with money. And these kind of cookie cutter templates, that's a great example of what I mean by, people call it a strategy, like a saving strategy or financial strategy. And what they mean is a recipe or a step-by-step plan. But step-by-step plans uses templates transferred from one person into a different context to a different person is inherently non-strategic. Right? It's strategic to pay attention to context and use a proper understanding of context to make good alternative use decisions. Pulling in a recipe from one context to another, just because they seem to be similar, is not strategic. And any financial planner I've talked to, their ideas are really not, even ones that I like and that I've worked with and that are kind of, they have helpful like knowledge. Like I look for them for facts, but their strategic planning is garbage, because I'm pretty out of the box with how I've earned money, right? And so the template particularly doesn't apply to me. But they'll run numbers on if you save this much or if you do this much, and it's all nonsense, right? And the whole way through, I didn't know within $500,000 or more how much I'd make the following year, right? And so the swings are so wild. Like I couldn't even tell you this year within $1 million how much I'll make. That's not a brag. I mean, maybe I'll make half of what I made last year. Yeah, I don't have it assured that I'll make. I'll probably make $1 million. I might not make $2 million. Who knows? Probably, presumably will, but who knows? And again, it's no longer part of my real goal structure to exactly target money at this point at all. So again, I went through all that to kind of give you the thought process and to illustrate once again the difference between being strategic in a good way and confusing strategy with a recipe. And it's amazing when you look for this. People that are supposed planners and strategists, they're very often just template pullers. Right, recipe switchers, that's it. And then they'll call themselves strategists, but they're not. And they'll say they're giving you a strategy when in fact they're giving you a recipe, which in common usage of the term isn't wrong usage, but you want to distinguish. Different topic. You also talked about in the 2013 LOI videos about for having a successful romantic relationship is being with someone who's for having a successful romantic relationship is being someone who is good at being in a relationship. I'm 39 and never really been in a long-term relationship. I can be pretty selfish with my time. Is there any book or course recommendations? This isn't my priority right now. I can't think of one right now. What is it? There's one book, I can't remember if it's just simply Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus is actually a pretty iconic and helpful book. Why Women Don't Get Enough Love and Men Don't Get Enough Sex is reasonably helpful. But one big thing is to distinguish between, like using my kind of thinking patterns, you should be able to figure some stuff out. You're selfish with your time. You want to distinguish between, and this is going to be helpful for everyone in all kinds of ways. You need to have a distinction between liking and loving. And again, in common usage, the word love is used to just mean you like it a lot. So I'm not talking about what the common usage is or not, but you want to have a distinction of concepts regardless of what word you use. When you like something, it's about how something else makes you feel. It's a legitimate concept, right? Things can make you feel good or not. So you can like it when you talk about how much you like a person or if you like them a lot. It's about how much you like how they make you feel. That has nothing to do with love. Love is about you being happy, you making a choice that you're happy, happier if they're happy. Like you want them to be happy, and the amount that you love them is related to the amount that you're willing to pay, where it's going to be worth it for you. It's not actually a sacrifice, right? When you pay money and buy something or get something that you want more than the money, calling that a sacrifice is ridiculous, right? You just made a good trade. So if you love somebody and you're willing to pay 3 hours for them to experience a certain amount of happiness about something, right? Then that's not people call that a sacrifice, but that's a misunderstanding of the situation. And again, it's non-strategic to call it a sacrifice. It kind of screws up your strategic thinking. It screws up a proper thinking about alternative use of resources. Obviously, it's not a sacrifice if I spend 3 hours or I spend a certain amount of money and I go and buy something or do something or some combination thereof that makes my wife a certain amount happy, and that's worth it for me, then there's no sacrifice. I'm better off, right? I literally traded something that had less value to me for something that has more value to me. And loving somebody gives you that opportunity. If you don't have someone that you love, and I'm not restricting that inherently to a romantic relationship, but there's certain realities to a romantic relationship in addition. But one way or the other, when you have someone that you love, and this is what the benefit people get out of kids, right? Which may or may not be a good alternative use, but still. When you have someone that you love, it allows you to spend resources in a way where you get more back, literally. It's not altruistic except in a totally positive sense. And again, right, you're saying it now in maybe a novel way that you hadn't looked at it before. Just like if a new store opens up in your neighborhood that has stuff you want to buy, right? That's just better. That's what it's like if you love somebody. And the more you love them, the more it's worth it, right? It's like having more good stuff in the store. The more you can spend your resources in a way where you're literally better off because they're happy, but you get a payoff from that, like a literal payoff in happiness and so forth, right? And ultimately, all of your resources are, you're trying to spend them to have more goodness for yourself. You say, what about other people? Well, that's where the whole love comes in. Then it's better to love everyone to some degree, right? You don't have enough resources to basically spend, all the money and time on everybody. So at some point it becomes irrelevant. But at the point where you can spend everything that you don't need for your own survival, even better on, where someone else is happy, right? I suppose that's pretty nifty, right? You can cash it in for even more, right? And then you could probably find ways to just enjoy the whole process, and so forth. Anyway, that kind of gives you some insight. So loving someone is about you actually getting a real payoff from them being better off. And once you have that, then you won't be selfish with your time. You'll just be strategic with your time, right? I don't invest all of my money and time into my wife being happy because that wouldn't actually lead to the most good stuff for me or her or whatever. Anyway, but I can invest, some money and some time into her. And if I didn't have that, then that would then I wouldn't be able to do that. And then once you have that, then the romantic relationship has the whole benefit of physical and emotional intimacy. And so that is a great payoff. Then you can invest your resources in a way that not even just with love, but where you can just have interactions with a person, intimate interactions with someone and it's real often kind of weirdly low cost, and it's easy, right? When you hear about pickup artists and what they get, what they do, it's actually a huge cost in what they do and the effort they put in compared to what it costs if you're in a great relationship. Great. Okay, great. Siaka had some good links there. All right, I need to end this in a moment. That's great. Drop what I was doing to be on this webinar because it felt important suddenly. Excellent. Well, that's probably a good choice. See if there's anything in the last 1 minute. If money demands are currently stressful, should be focused on resolving stress, then regroup. Yeah, I've talked about this where you want to identify the real boundary, the real place where you need a certain amount of money, and then you solve that problem. You either do it through manna coming from the sky or getting a sugar mommy or daddy or whatever, or something that takes care of that money. But for most or all of us, earning that money through just business trade is going to be the best way to deal with it, rather than finding a way to survive homeless and being happy, or becoming a monk somewhere. But one way or the other, you have to solve the issue of the minimum amount you need regarding kind of just general stuff that you deal with, that you would generally think of as money, like shelter, food, your iPhone bill, and so forth. And figure out what that is realistically, but minimally, but realistically, and then go after that and pay what you need to pay. And you don't need to have many boundaries on that. Do what you have to do. Just don't, trample on someone else's property or screw yourself so badly in a way that you don't need to, right? You don't need to pay more, right? You still can pay we can generally accomplish that without, cutting off our arm or selling our kidney or something like that, right? So, within reason. But do what you have to do to get that, and distinguish that. You don't have to set a goal for 10,000 to start with. Find the boundary. When you find real boundaries and priorities that are gained through clarity, rather than through fiat, rather than through just the feeling of control. See, you guys, when you just spit out a number and a time frame, that's what I mean by violating the law of implication. I say focus on what you know. Focus on clarity, and you'll get more clarity, and that'll lead to all kinds of good stuff in your life. Find the real amount that you need and get that first, and then you will naturally get more and more. You'll have clarity about more money that you want for reasons that you can easily trade it for good stuff, right? Suppose you take care of your basic needs for $3,000 a month, or $1,000 a month, or whatever, $5,000. Then it's pretty easy to spot, oh wow, for an extra $2,000, I could have this house, and I have a good sense of how much happier I'll be, like how much more goodness I'll have from having that house. And then you can have a sense of what it'll take to earn that, and it'll be pretty clear if it's worth it. See, clarity will build clarity. But try to find priorities and boundaries through clarity, not just by dictating, right? Not just by calling your bill Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. Try to write a bill that actually reduces costs or gets more people insured or that sort of thing, if that makes sense, right? So try to get it right through clarity. Don't just say, oh, I want to make $10,000 in the next 6 months and then wonder where the problem is. Okay, clarity. Awesome. Oh, wait, I'm very confused. So how to make sure your mind doesn't screw up every time you need to make an important decision. That's awesome. Well, at least that's great that you have the question, and the more you stick with it, the more you feel like having the right question is useful and not a problem, doesn't cause you pain because you don't have the result yet. In school, you got programmed into you through a lot of experiences that having a question without the answer is bad and basically gets you an F. So you feel like having a question and feeling confused is like bad. It's like a problem that needs to be solved now because it's causing you emotional pain, and you must be doing something wrong. But no, if you have that question, then you're doing something right all by itself. And that question, what is a question? What's the implication of a question? That the answer is out there, that it can be found. Now, if the implication of a question for you, if you have a deeper belief, this is a real problem, that the implication of a question is that you feel pain and feel stupid, and that it inherently means you're confused. But until you have the answer, then that's terrible. Because if questions cause you pain, I'm not lecturing you, I'm just pointing this out. Then the implication of that is you want to avoid questions, right? If questions all by themselves make you feel good and imply that the answer is out there and will come to you, including through searching for it, not just by luck, right? You optimize things, you do your own. But you ask the question actively in a certain way. Then that's good. Questions apply answers, and they're like magnets for answers. So having a magnet is inherently great. As a matter of fact, you can look at life as all you really need to do is rig the magnets properly, and they'll magnetize. That's magnets magnetize. Attractors attract. So you focus on the attractors, and you focus on the attractors for the attractors. An example of attractor for attractor is your standards and norms and so forth. Or the idea of whether you feel like questions are good or painful is like an attractor for an attractor. The question's an attractor, but then whether or not you want questions or you feel like they're bad, or you're like you deserve an F for having a question and not the answer, then that's like an attractor for an attractor. So you focused on the greater context until you win. But keep going through. My training is basically all about. So it's awesome that you have this question, because all of my training is about, in one sense of understanding it, is about this statement right here. How to make sure your mind doesn't screw up every time you need to make an important decision. Instead of ignoring that, now you have that question and feel like it's more important than you felt like earlier. And that's one angle. There's dozens of ways you can phrase the same critical angle in life. How do I seek understanding? How do I understand understanding? What's the most important question? All right, what do I know? Those are all kind of logically connected to the most important thing in life. And what you said is an example of it too. So awesome. That's one of the greatest attractors you're going to have. And when you have an attractor then swimming around in the right pond that has good stuff and not bad stuff is helpful. And so going through my training with that question is going to be super. Okay, there you go. There's the Mihail, says Mihail, with flow written down there. Oh, it's great to be on live. That's awesome, Luke. Okay, I need to end the webinar now, but I will, and you're welcome, Jose. I will take a look at the questions here, and I might address a number of them next session. Procrastination motivation. I've dealt with that multiple times in the past, but I'm always happy to go over it from a different angle or give it an answer that kind of inherently is a little bit new and can help people. But I'll take a look at this next time. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Wow, once again, a lot of people. So now we have twice as many people on now than were signed up like an hour before the webinar. So that's cool. Regardless, appreciate the discussion. I know I couldn't get to it all this time, but we'll do more next time. That's why we keep going. And there'll always be some questions or many questions that are opened up. That's good. That's helpful. You're building more good magnets. And when you look at life that way, where you focus on building the right magnets, everything else will fall into place. And I will say from there. Got a little frozen there. I'll give a final little focus on just some of the final little happy comments. You're very welcome, guys. Very, very welcome. Thank you. I don't feel like this was as much structure as I like to have ideally, but I think it all went well. All these, again, it's a hologram. We just spend time together and it'll help. The inherent within this topic, this whole general topic, law of implication, is that we just keep going, right? That it's not like step by step, step one, you do this, step two, you do that. Or if it is, I haven't found that yet. So it's, again, with a hologram, you just can focus in anywhere and it'll help clear more things up. Yeah, incredible audience, absolutely. Magic card, yeah, there's me. A little thinner then. You're very welcome, Michael. Take care, Janice. You're very welcome, Henry. Welcome, Susanna.